Okay, we are live. How you doing, everybody? Chuck Holton here, and I'm sorry I haven't been on in a day or two, but I have been uh, traveling. I'm back in my lodge in West Virginia, and it's going to be probably a week, 10 days or so here, and then off to do a bunch of other stuff. We've got a family reunion coming up, so this is as close as I get to a vacation. Actually, vacation for me is a week at home with power outage, so nobody can reach me. So, hello, good morning from Covington, Georgia, and we've got there's one tired mama, super fan. Great to see you guys. Yeah, it's been a couple days, and I've been actually really enjoying just being home and puttering around my farm here. There's always a ton of work to do when I'm here, so much so that I barely get indoors from sunup to sundown. But I wanted to come on and so you don't forget about me. Just do a quick live and talk a little bit about some things that are not getting much reporting in the media. There are some facets of the war in Israel that are actually tied to the war in Ukraine, and most people don't have any idea. So, for example, were you aware that Russia has 18 forward operating bases inside Syria just across the border from Israel? These are outposts that they use to keep an eye on Israel and to make it more difficult for Israel to strike at the militia groups who are firing rockets and missiles and drones out of Syria into Israel. One other thing it does is it helps to make it easier for... Audio's really low. All right, we'll turn the audio up a little bit. Tell Mom to turn her computer up.
She did.
Hang on a minute. Let me check my audio. I think we're... Well, audio's really low. We'll turn the audio up a little bit. As I can get it at the moment. So, what I wanted to talk about, like I say, was just Russia doing what it can to make the war in Israel last longer. Oh, hi, Pam. Good to see you. I see Pam Cheek on there. We just got back from a great trip to Armenia with Pam. You should go check out her Facebook page called Enjoying the Journey, where she's been putting up pictures and videos of what's going on, or what we did while we were in Armenia. So this is, again, something that is not getting a lot of media attention, but one of the reasons that Russia has troops and more troops along the border between Israel and Syria is because they are trying to assist the Iranians in bringing weapons into Hezbollah. Iran trying to get these weapons, into Lebanon across Syria. They want that, sort of Iranian land bridge across Syria. And whenever Israel finds that Iran is moving weapons across there, whenever they can nail down, okay, this is a place where those weapons are being driven across, Israel tries to strike at those places. But here's something you probably didn't know. Israel actually has to coordinate with Russia in order to be able to strike those places. Now, think about that for a minute. Israel has to call Russia on the phone and say, hey, we're about to strike inside Syria, and they have to coordinate with Russia because Russia's got a bunch of fighter jets in that area, and they have to deconflict. The United States has to deconflict whenever we're flying any kind of missions inside Syria as well. So this is really weird. It's one of those kind of strange things about war is that here Russia is one of our adversaries, and whenever we want to do something, we have to call our adversary and say, hey, just to let you know, we're about to do something over there. And so we don't want, because the reason we do that is we don't want to spark some sort of wider conflict by accidentally shooting down a Russian fighter jet. Does that make sense? And neither does Israel. Israel doesn't want to get into a conflict with a Russian fighter jet. That would be bad for obvious reasons. Now let's see if... Okay. Maybe this microphone would work a little better. I just changed the microphone to my to a different microphone. We'll see if that works any better. This is my microphone. Okay, is this better? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so whenever Israel wants to strike at Syria, they have to coordinate with Russia. Now, they don't have to get Russia's permission per se, but they have to coordinate with Russia so that they don't accidentally shoot down a Russian fighter jet and vice versa. But what that does is it gives Russia the ability to alert Iran and say, hey, you might want to move your stuff out of that warehouse because it's about to get hit. Now, I don't think the IDF actually has to tell Russia the exact coordinates that it's going to strike, just that they're going to perform a strike in a general area. But even still, it's giving away their intentions. It's reducing the effectiveness of their strikes, and it's a problem. It's a big problem. Most people didn't know that Russia has troops along the border with Syria, and they didn't before the war started. They had plenty of troops in Syria. I've seen them personally when I was in Syria, but they started moving troops down to the Golan Heights on the Syrian side. Now, many people also didn't realize that there is a UN force that is supposed to be arrayed between Israel and Syria. One of these observer forces, they call it UNDOF. It was part of the agreement that ended the Arab-Israeli War in 1974. And so there's been a UN peacekeeping force on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights since the Yom Kippur War. And are they maintaining a ceasefire? No. Are they supervising the disengagement of Israeli and Syrian forces? No. Are they monitoring the separation and limitation in the Golan Heights? Maybe. Are they reporting on breaches of that agreement? There have been dozens of breaches of that agreement from the Syrian side as Syrian militias, Iranian-backed militias in Syria, have fired across that border into the Golan Heights in Israel. So is this UNDOF force doing any good at all? Well, what do you think? Of course not. Just like the UN force that's supposed to be keeping the Hezbollah forces in Lebanon from moving south of the Litani River and from striking at Israel. That's a different UN force called UNIFIL, the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, interim force that's been there since 1978. It's just an interim force. It's just there for a little while, just to, until things calm down. They've been there since 1978. Is that insane or what? But these forces are worse than worthless because the terrorists actually use them as human shields. The UNIFIL force in Lebanon cannot move anywhere without getting permission from Hezbollah to do so. And I would imagine that now the UNDAF force in Syria is probably in the same situation, that there are certain places they're not allowed to go. There are certain things they're not allowed to look at. So it's virtually impossible for them to do their job. But yet we, being the United States, we're funding 28% of the UN's entire budget and have been for years. Some of that money goes to fund these boondoggles of UN peacekeeping forces that are supposed to be helping to protect Israel. And they actually see their job. They don't see their job as protecting Israel so much as protecting Syria from Israel, protecting Lebanon from Israel, as if that even needed to be done. Look, Israel is no threat to its neighbors as long as its neighbors aren't attacking it. Now, let's go through some of the things that Russia has done to counter this war, or to make this war last longer. Now, and then we'll talk about why that could possibly be the case. Why is Russia actually supporting Hamas in this war and not Israel? I mean, Israel, for its part, has been very careful not to anger Russia over the war in Ukraine. So Israel has not joined the international sanctions that were imposed on Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. They should have, but they didn't. Israel has refused Ukraine's request to supply it with defensive weapons to fight against Russia. Israel is trying not to anger Russia, as Russia allows, partially because Russia allows Israeli forces to operate in Syrian airspace, because again, they have to coordinate with Russia in order to do that. So even though 76% of Israelis support Ukraine in this war, feel like the Israeli government should take a stronger stance against Russia concerning the war in Ukraine, the Israeli government has avoided doing so for several reasons. First of all, Israel has, you might know this, a large Russian-speaking population, has over 1 million immigrants from the former Soviet Union, and so that kind of complicates things, as you can imagine. But most of the people, most of the Israelis, including Russian Israelis, don't support what Russia is doing in Ukraine and would like for the Israeli government to take a stronger position against it. So what has Russia done since the war started in Israel, between Israel and Hamas? Well, Vladimir Putin hosted Hamas leaders in Moscow, has been strengthening ties with Palestinian militant groups, including the PIJ and Hezbollah. Obviously, these are terrorist organizations. And that's a pretty major provocation against Israel. Russia has criticized Israel's military responses in Gaza, calling them disproportionate and inhumane. Really? Disproportionate? So what would have been proportionate? What would have been the right response there? Should Israel have just flooded into Gaza and killed 1,200 civilians, burned some babies, raped some women, and then called it a day? I've argued this before. The whole concept of saying that a war needs to be disproportionate either displays a profound lack of understanding about the nature of war or the purpose of war. Because the purpose of war is not to be tit for tat. That's a recipe for a war that will last forever. Tit for tat, proportionate response, guarantees that the war will never end. That's what we've seen on the northern border between Israel and Lebanon, is that Hezbollah fires a rocket or two or some missiles at Israel. Israel fires some back at Hezbollah. They play ping pong with missiles, and then nobody's getting anywhere. It's not changing anything in the equation. The only way to change the equation, the only way to put a stop to the threat, is to act so disproportionately that the enemy begs you to stop and throws up its hands and surrenders. That's the only way to win a war. So for Russia to call Israel's response in Gaza disproportionate and inhumane just shows that Russia is supporting Hamas in this war. Russia has even gone so far as to draw parallels between the blockade of Gaza. And again, let's talk about what this blockade is. The blockade in Gaza is not keeping everything out of Gaza. What Israel has been doing is they've been controlling the flow of goods into Gaza for years because Hamas likes to bring in weapons and missiles and explosives. And so Israel hasn't been stopping the flow of food into Gaza. By their own admission. Look at what UNRWA says, that there used to be 500 trucks a day moving into Gaza. That doesn't sound like a blockade to me. Now, Israel has been inspecting those trucks to make sure that they don't contain missiles. And you would expect them to do that since Hamas makes a habit and has made a habit for decades of shooting missiles at Israel. So for Russia to say Israel's blockade of Gaza is the same as Nazi Germany's siege of Leningrad during World War II is profane, to say the least. To say nothing of the hypocrisy of Russia saying that at the very same time they are assaulting the sovereignty of Ukraine. They are bombing civilians in Ukraine on a daily basis. They are absolutely wiping villages and towns off the face of the earth inside Ukraine without justification. That's pretty hypocritical. It's nuclear level hypocrisy. Some of the diplomats in the United Nations from Russia have been making anti-Semitic comments. They used to support Benjamin Netanyahu, but they're not anymore. They even went so far as to submit a UN Security Council resolution that condemned the violence against civilians and made zero mention of Hamas. It was so egregious that even the UN Security Council, which is no friend of Israel, they rejected the resolution that was submitted by Russia because it was so unfair that they couldn't stomach it. Now, how does Russia benefit from this ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas? Well, there's a bunch of ways. First of all, as I've talked about before, it serves as a distraction from the war in Ukraine. It not only distracts the Americans' attention from the war in Ukraine, but it also dilutes their ability to send aid to Ukraine, because now we have to send aid to Israel as well. So that's one thing. Now, there was some question at the beginning of the war on October 7th of whether or not Russia was directly involved in the October 7th attacks. Because in some of the videos that were put out by Hamas from the October 7th attacks, there were a couple of places where you could hear commands being given from off camera in Russian. That's what it sounded like. Now, I've never seen anybody do a serious investigation of that. That's the kind of thing Bellingcat should have been looking into. Bellingcat is a open source intelligence agency. Let me see here if there's any articles about that. October 7th attack against Israel. I'm just going to look and see if there are any. Okay, so what Perplexity is saying is that there are no concrete evidence that they were involved. However, there was no concrete evidence they were directly involved. However, a former UN ambassador for the United States, Nikki Haley, and a former presidential candidate, alleged that Russia provided intelligence support to Hamas for the attack, but she didn't provide any evidence to substantiate that. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov condemned the actions on October 7th right after it happened, but then they walked that back later on. So I don't think anybody has done a deep dive into whether or not, like, there were Wagner Group operatives inside Gaza that were helping to train and equip the Hamas fighters who came into Israel. There was some question about that, but nobody ever found out for sure if they did. But there's no question that Russia would have some benefit from the war. So, like I said, diverting attention and resources away from Ukraine, that's helpful to Russia. And so that means they're going to want that they're going to want the war to go on for as long as possible. It also allows Russia to reassert itself as a diplomatic power broker in the Middle East. So by engaging, Vladimir Putin invited the leaders of Hamas to Moscow after October 7th. This, I'm sure in his eyes, makes it look as if he's, engaging with all the parties to try to calm things down, try to maybe help stop the war or something like that. They have not been directly involved in any kind of peace negotiations. So it looks more like Russia was asserting its support for Hamas by having Hamas leaders to Moscow. Any instability and insecurity in the Middle East reinforces Russia's narrative, what they've been saying, that the United States is an ineffective guarantor of regional stability. And in that, they're pretty much right, because the weak administration we have in power in the United States right now has been unbelievably feckless in its foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. So the war in Israel gives Russia the ability to point at that and say, look how worthless the United States is. You guys should listen to us, and we should be your security partner, not the United States. But here's the biggest one, I think. Here's the biggest reason why Russia wants this war to continue. Because it drives up oil prices. And higher oil prices, because Russia is struggling big time economically. Any rise in oil prices is going to benefit Russia because oil is their major export. Even though they're not able to export it to Europe now, they're still exporting oil and natural gas to the former Soviet Union states, Tajikistan, Armenia, and places like that. They're also selling it to China, although China requires them to sell at a very big discount. But if the price of oil goes up, then that discount can be erased somewhat. So Russia is using this crisis to make money. It also assists Russia's ally Iran the longer this goes on. So Russia is trying to support Iran in this. Iran is helping Russia with its war against Ukraine by selling it missiles and drones, these Shahed 136 drones. I have a piece of one of those drones right here. This is a piece of a Shahed drone that I brought back from Ukraine. This drone smashed into a school in Mykolaiv, and I was able to get, this is the wing, part of the wing from the drone. Got that in November of 2022. This is the kind of thing that Chuck Holton brings home as souvenirs. Right? So Russia's making money off of this war. They see it as a way that they can weaken the United States further, and they're right about that. One Tired Mama asks, why is Russia making alliances with Rocket Man in North Korea? Well, they're basically just solidifying that alliance. They've been receiving weapons, missiles and rockets and things like that from North Korea that they're using in Ukraine for quite some time. Actually, more than a year, probably 2 years. But Vladimir Putin just made his first trip to North Korea personally in 24 years, and they signed a deal that increases the military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. You understand, this is why if you go back and watch the videos that I've made about whether or not we're in World War III, this is one of the reasons why I say we are already in World War III. Because Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and other countries as well are forming an axis of evil, just like Germany and Italy and the axis of evil that was formed in World War II. And they are doing that specifically to counter the United States and our allies, trying to change the rules of the game of the global order. And even though in this case, the war is not directly against or between the primary players, so Russia and the United States are not directly fighting China and the United States, or NATO and, NATO is not directly fighting Iran, or Israel is not directly fighting Iran, something like that. But it is, I think, the opening stage. I think when the historians write the history of World War III, we'll already have been in it right here. We're in World War III because you have this axis of evil that's working very hard, and the war is happening in a sort of not a direct way, it's an indirect way. Right? the United States is at war, but I mean, we're being warred against by all of these countries, but they're doing it in an asymmetric way. So you understand, asymmetric warfare is warfare by other means. So they're using cyberspace to try to hurt America. They're pumping fentanyl into the United States to hurt America. They're using immigrants as weapons of war. They're weaponizing migration against the United States. All of this is intentional, and it's all designed to bring down America. It's all designed to remove America as the major rule setter, the Pax Americana that has been in place across the globe since the Cold War. It's designed to allow Russia and China and Iran to set the rules of the global order, and not the United States and Western Europe. So this is it's an ongoing conflict. Russia wants the conflict in Israel to continue. They are literally flying combat patrols along the border between Israel and Syria right now in the Golan Heights. Russia has not fired on Israel yet, but they don't really need to. They're just enabling the militias that are in Syria to do the fighting for them. This is another aspect of what I'm calling World War III, is that World War III is going to be fought more by proxies than by the major players. See, this is something that we've learned from World War II. World War II was total war. It was unbelievably destructive for the entire planet. There were nuclear weapons used at a time when America was the only country with nuclear weapons. But that kind of war is not going to happen again, because now everybody has nuclear weapons. And you would be looking at the end of humanity if we went to total war like we had in World War II. And so in order to avoid having nuclear powers fight against each other and destroy the whole planet, World War III is going to look like proxy war supported by the major players. So Israel is a proxy for the United States. Ukraine is a proxy between for Western Europe and for the U.S. Russia is using Iran, and Iran is using their proxies to fight against the U.S. and Israel. This is how World War III looks. Now, for those of you who have been supporting Russia in its fight against Ukraine because you believe the Russian propaganda that Russia has been, or that Ukraine is hopelessly corrupt. First of all, even if the government of Ukraine was corrupt, that doesn't absolve Russia from, it doesn't give Russia the right to attack Ukraine out of the blue in February of 2022. If you believe that Ukraine has been shutting down Christian churches across the country, that's not true. They have shut down some Russian Orthodox churches because the priests had been replaced by FSB agents, and they were literally gathering military intelligence and then radioing that intelligence to the Russian military from Russian Orthodox churches inside Ukraine. There are, do a Google search. There's a ton of articles about how Ukrainian churches in Russian-held territory inside Ukraine and in Russia, Protestant churches have faced a violent crackdown by Russian FSB and other Russian forces. They've burned churches, they've arrested pastors. I've interviewed pastors that have been arrested by Russia. Okay, so if anybody is cracking down on the church, it's Russia, not Ukraine. If you support Russia because, they won't allow this LGBT agenda into their country, so they must be the good guys. Well, keep in mind that Hamas doesn't allow the LGBT agenda either, right? Neither does any other extremist Muslim country. So the mere fact that Russia is smarter about not allowing the LGBT agenda into its country doesn't make them the good guys. The fact that they do something that's good, that's a good idea, doesn't make them the good guys in these things. Okay? Somebody asks, is this war about Ukraine power or about them joining NATO? Well, the fact that Russia doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO is not a valid excuse for Russia to invade Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign country. If Ukraine wants to join NATO, well, there are things Russia could do economically, diplomatically, to counter that. But it doesn't justify murdering hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. It doesn't justify taking over Ukraine. If Mexico decided it wanted to ally with Iran, well, we wouldn't like it here in the United States. But do you think we should invade and take over Mexico and, bomb their cities into dust and murder hundreds of thousands of innocent Mexicans because their government decided to make an alliance we didn't like? Look, Russia doesn't have to like what its neighbors do. But just because it doesn't like them doesn't mean that it has the right to attack them militarily. And so if you somehow mistakenly found yourself on the side of supporting Russia between the war between Russia and Ukraine, I'm trying to help you understand that you are rooting for the wrong side. I don't care about the politics. If you're like, well, if Joe Biden supports Ukraine, then I have to be against it because I hate Joe Biden. It is possible for Joe Biden to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. If you are so wedded to your team politically that you have to counter, you have to be against absolutely everything that the other team does, I would submit to you that you're in a cult. You need to be able to look at each situation individually and make a determination of the morality of that thing independent of your team politically. Some people have a very hard time doing that. If Donald Trump says something or does something that is just beyond the pale, it's just wrong, and you cannot bring yourself to criticize Donald Trump for anything he's done, then you're in a cult. And I'm sorry, but you are. You need to think about that. Now, I can certainly agree if you say the United States is bankrupt. We're looking at a $1.9 trillion deficit this year. The deficit, the amount of money that we are spending that we don't have this year, is greater than the entire national debt was when I was in college. We're looking at a $50 trillion national debt by 2040. And that doesn't take into account the fact that the government has gotten very good at hiding debt that it should count toward the national debt, but it doesn't. It calls them unfunded liabilities, or it calls them something else. But if you look at all of the money that the United States government is on the hook to pay in the next 10 years, it's not 34 trillion like they say the national debt is. Well, I don't know. That's probably changed. It could be 36 by now. Let's look at the national debt clock and see where we're at right this minute. The real-time national debt, based on the measurement that the government is using at the moment, is $34.8 trillion. Okay? But that's because the government has changed the rules of the game. They've changed the way that they measure debt over the last, since the 1980s. If you went back and measured the national debt the way that we measured it in the 1980s, our national debt would right now be somewhere north of $200 trillion. To say that it's impossible for us to pay that back is the height of understatement. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to even pretend that we're going to be able to pay that back. America is beyond broke. I mean, broke would be a goal for America to try to attain at some point 10 or 20 years from now, to just be broke. We're so far beyond broke now that it's ridiculous. So the United States is likely to lose its spot as a global superpower at some point in the not too distant future. When that happens, the vacuum that's created by the United States disappearing from the world stage is going to likely be filled by our adversaries. And our adversaries are working very hard to make sure that that happens sooner rather than later. But we don't have to go down without a fight. And unfortunately, the United States government that we have in power right now is doing everything it can to hasten the demise of America on the world stage. Monica Forrester says, Zelensky is no great guy either. So I would ask you, Monica, do you know Vladimir Zelensky? Have you met him? What makes you say that he's not a great guy? You've read some things that people said about him. Lots of people say lots of things about lots of people. I can tell you I have met Vladimir Zelensky twice. I've interviewed him. I've asked him questions. I am very close. I've made very good friends with his number one advisor, his right-hand man, the guy who sits in the office next to Zelensky. This guy and I have sat around naked together in the sauna many times when I've been in this months and months that I've spent in Ukraine. And when I asked that guy about Vladimir Zelensky, he says he's a regular Joe. That's why we voted for him, because he's a Trump-like figure in Ukraine. We voted him in because he's not a politician. We voted him in because we wanted him to get rid of the corruption. And he's done a pretty good job at doing that. So I'm not telling you what I think. I'm telling you what the Ukrainians think. So if you think Zelensky is not a great guy because of some things that you've read about him, I would just counter that by saying that Zelensky has a 91% approval rating with Ukrainians in Ukraine. So I don't think Vladimir Zelensky really cares what you think about him, because he only cares what his people think about him. Geraldine says Zelensky is a criminal. How so? How do you think he's a criminal? Can you prove that? Or you've read some things on the internet about him that make you think he's a criminal. If you go back and look at the things that happened between Zelensky and Biden, where Biden was pressuring Zelensky to fire certain people and to do certain things, Zelensky was pushing back against Biden, and Biden was the criminal in that thing, not Zelensky. So whether or not you think he's a criminal, like I said, I'll just keep saying this. The people in Ukraine, the people who voted for him, think he's great. They think he's doing a great job. The vast majority of them. Here's Sally says, shut down elections. Well, they did shut down the elections in Ukraine while they're at war because it would be all but impossible for the people of Ukraine to vote, to have a vote, since Russia controls 20% of their country right now. So all those Ukrainians that are living under occupation inside Ukraine that's being occupied by Russia won't be able to vote for the president. So how should you say, are you saying that Zelensky should have held a vote when 20% of the people in of the voters are unable to vote? Not to mention the fact that they would somehow have to get ballots out to the front lines, which is extremely dangerous. They'd have to get ballots out to the places that are not actually controlled by Russia, but are under fire from Russia, putting people at risk. It doesn't make sense for Ukraine to hold elections right now because of that. And that's the reason why he did it. So Geraldine says, I'm not saying Biden is innocent, but neither is Zelensky. Again, what are you basing that on, Geraldine? Do you know Zelensky? Have you talked to him? I know him. I mean, I've met him. I've asked him questions. But like I say, I know people around him who do know him very well, who know him privately, who know what he's like in real life. And they say he's a normal guy. He's not a criminal. He's not an oligarch. I would say that, Geraldine, you have been subjected to a relentless barrage of Russian propaganda, and some of it you believe. George Smith says, Chuck, is the overseas military vote counted? They vote absentee, so the absentee votes must be counted. Yes, they do get counted. My understanding is that they only get counted if there's a tie. Now, I could be wrong about that. Some people have said that I'm wrong. That's what I've been told. Absentee ballots eventually do get counted. But so please do, Geraldine, please do your homework. Yeah. I'm not getting after you, Geraldine. I'm saying, Geraldine, you most likely have been subjected to a tremendous amount of Russian propaganda. Most conservative Americans have. This is one of the ways that Russia is fighting against the United States. One of the ways that Russia is at war with the United States. This asymmetric warfare includes a full court press on the American public to try to change the American public's opinion of Russia and make them feel like Russia is the good guy. Well, let me tell you, anybody who's supporting Hamas, not the good guy. Anybody who's wantonly murdering tens of thousands of Ukrainians who did not attack Russia, who didn't even hate Russia, that's not the good guy. You can't say they're the good guy. Again, I don't look at this from a political standpoint. I don't look at this because I'm a Republican, and so therefore I have to be against anything the Democrats do. I don't look at it that way. I look at it from a moral standpoint, and that's all. And from a moral standpoint, what Russia has done to Ukraine is morally reprehensible. It's wrong. What Hamas did to Israel is morally reprehensible. It's wrong. Did Hamas have a beef with Israel? A legitimate beef with Israel? Perhaps. Perhaps Hamas had a right to be angry with Israel. But that did not give Hamas the right to swarm into civilian kibbutzim along the border and towns and villages all along the border and murder Israeli civilians. That did not give them the right to do that. You don't have the right to intentionally target civilians. And so you cannot support Hamas and say you're the good guy. I'm sorry, you just can't do it. And it's the same with Russia. Heartbeat says, what's the approval rate of Putin? Well, Putin does have a pretty high approval rating in Russia, but I think you have to caveat that by saying that most Russians are only exposed to Russian media. So they don't get the other side of the story. Just like most Palestinians inside Gaza are not getting the other side of the story. When I talk to Palestinian merchants in Jerusalem, they're watching Palestinian media. They're watching Al Jazeera. And so they're only getting one side of the story. And they're only hearing about, they're being told Hamas did not murder any civilians on October 7th. They're being told that Israel murdered civilians on October 7th. By the way, if you believe that Israel machine gunned its own civilians in order to create this conflict, I'm sorry, but you're just wrong. I mean, that is so wrong. That is so ridiculous. So, am I a Nicky Republican? No, I'm not a Nicky Republican. I mean, look, I think there are a lot of people in America that would probably make a better president than Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump has a very hard time getting out of the way of his own ego. Donald Trump would have been a great president if somebody had taken his phone away from him, so he'd have to actually do something besides tweet during the last thing. Donald Trump did a lot of things I agreed with, and I voted for him. I'm very glad that he was president over Hillary Clinton, for sure. But he's got a real ego problem. Again, I'm looking at these things from a moral standpoint, and I just feel like saying, in a nation of 330 million people, shouldn't we be able to find somebody who has better morals than Donald Trump? Who takes an ethical stand on things? Personally, I'm one of those people that I have a hard time respecting anybody who cheats on his wife. And I can separate the fact that Donald Trump cheated on his wife many times from the fact that he will make a better president than Joe Biden. I can separate those two things. But as a person, it's very hard for me. Look, if you're not faithful to your own wife, how can you be faithful to your country? How can you be faithful to anything else? How can you be trusted with anything else? That's how I look at it, because I look at it from a moral standpoint. And I'm not saying that we have to find somebody who's perfect. There's only one perfect man on planet Earth. But shouldn't we be able to find somebody who can at least just be faithful to his wife and isn't a potted plant and doesn't support murdering babies? And I mean, shouldn't we be able to find somebody who could take a moral, principled stand in the world today, in a nation of 330 million people? I just feel like we ought to be able to do that. But that's not the choices that we're being given. So we've got to make the best of, make the best decision we can with two bad choices. And if you want to make America great, Proverbs 14:34 says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And so I think that we should strive to be righteous ourselves, and we should require righteousness of our politicians. But we don't. Instead, we worship celebrity. And if the only choice we have is a unfaithful, immoral celebrity, or absolutely immoral, senile, potted plant. If both of those choices are immoral men, then you vote for the one that's going to make America great, that's going to lead to more human flourishing. If you look at how did I get talking about this? I hate talking about politics. I think that if you want to know if something is good or evil, you just ask yourself, does that thing lead to life or to death? And every single thing that the left pushes around the world, in America and out of America, every single thing the left pushes leads to death. Abortion, gay rights, euthanasia, legalization of marijuana. I mean, yeah, I could go on and on and on. None of those things lead to life. And so, if we're faced with two bad choices, then I line up their positions on everything, and I ask myself, is their position on any of those things, what's the sum total of things that lead to life or things that lead to death? And the one that scores the highest on human flourishing, that's the one I vote for. In this case, that's going to be Donald Trump. But I don't have to like him as a person. I've met him. He's even more bombastic and arrogant in person than he is on TV, if you can believe that. Did I support Ron DeSantis for president? I did over Trump, but Trump purchased his way past the primaries in the first go-round. You understand that the primaries are supposed to be, a dozen candidates on each side for the Republicans and for the Democrats, competing only with each other for the dollars that will flow, that will help them compete in the general election. Okay? That's the whole point of the primaries, is there's a certain number of donor dollars available out there, and 10 or 12 people get together, they hash out their positions against one another, and the one with the best ideas, with the best position, gets the most donor dollars, and therefore wins, and gets to go head to head with the same guy that did the same thing on the Democratic side in the general election. But that didn't happen when Donald Trump ran. Donald Trump used his own money to outspend his opponents in the primaries and jump the line, so to speak. He didn't have to compete for the donor dollars. And so, unfortunately, that's how he became president. Now, I get that a lot of people want to vote for Donald Trump simply as a giant pulsating middle finger to the establishment. By the way, that's exactly what brought Vladimir Zelensky to power in Ukraine. He was a giant pulsating middle finger to the establishment over there. I get it that people want to, and Donald Trump being convicted of a sham felony only makes him a better candidate as a pulsating middle finger to the establishment. So it makes it more likely people will vote for him. More likely. And that's great. I mean, I get it. The fact that he throws himself into that arena when he doesn't need to, he's got all the money he needs, it's both a positive and a negative. Donald Trump, it's a positive because it shows that he cares enough to throw himself into the arena and try to do what's right for America and does not even take a paycheck for it. That's great. But it also shows that the only thing left for him to conquer in his life is power. He's got all the money he needs. So going after power that's his blood sport. And so I don't know which of those is more prevalent in his mind, but that's the way it goes. Laura Campbell says, I'm trying to listen to you about this, but I've seen different things. I'd like to I'd like to hear what things you've seen, Laura. Go ahead and post that. So Donald Trump is not our savior, but he's certainly a better choice when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to America being respected on the world stage. If not respected, then feared. Donald Trump's a better choice than the kumquat we have in the White House right now, without a doubt. So I don't know how I got off on that subject. I hate talking politics, and again, I'm not. I'm personally kind of ambivalent at this point, because I think that whoever you have driving the train at this point matters little, because the track is gone up ahead, the bridge is out, and the train is going to plunge off the bridge. And we're in the unenviable position of basically trying to fix the airplane while it's flying, and that's going to be tough. Jessica says, "Do you think he can free the hostages?" Yes, I do. I think because Donald Trump would say to Hamas, "You're going to free our hostages in the next 24 hours, or we will come in and help Israel demolish the rest of Gaza, and there will be nothing left." I think he would do that. Donald Trump has a habit of saying things that are kind of, over the top, and that makes him unpredictable, and unpredictability in this case is a good thing. So yeah, I think he would. Now, on that note, there was news that came out today. The United States thinks that less than 50 of the 120 hostages are still alive. I think it's less than that, because in the last round of peace negotiations, Hamas admitted that it couldn't even find 40 of the hostages. So it doesn't even know whether they're dead or alive. It can't even find them. It doesn't even know where they are. I think the chances of us getting more than a dozen or so of these hostages out alive by the end of this thing is pretty low. And that's a cynical way to look at it. I hate to say that, but I just think it's just not likely. Okay? Do I think the hostages will be set free? I think I just answered that one. How would Donald Trump deal with this in Israel? Well, he definitely support Israel more than Joe Biden, and that's good. He would likely, whether or not we would get involved militarily, we certainly would probably not be getting involved spending hundreds of millions of dollars on boondoggle piers to bring aid into Gaza. Donald Trump doesn't have to worry about catering to the angry leftists in America who support terror groups, and so he wouldn't care about that. All right. Not being able to find doesn't mean dead. Yes, that's correct. And they could have been smuggled into other Arab nations, and I hope at this point some of them were, so that they could still be alive. But the question is, these guys are not going to be given up anytime soon unless you get a different tack taken by the U.S. government. That's just all there is to it. So let's see here. Yeah, if Trump gets elected, one tired mama, we are going to get massive violent riots across the United States. And I think you should all be prepared for that. We should all be prepared for that, everyone. We should be thinking about what you will do, where you will go in the event that Trump wins. Somehow, through all of the election fraud that the Democrats have gotten so good at, if Trump manages to win, I think you need to be prepared for massive, generalized violence across the United States. And on that happy note, I'm going to end it. And I think that Trump would actually continue to push the Abraham Accords, and I think he would be successful at that. One thing Trump's very, very good at is making deals with people. So that's another good reason I think Trump would make a better president, is he pushes a hard bargain. He knows how to do that. And he's not afraid to talk to people that he shouldn't, that the Democrats wouldn't talk to. If Trump wasn't a celebrity, people would think different. Well, if Trump wasn't a celebrity, he never would have been president. America worships celebrities. And I am starting to think that this is, again, I don't make predictions, but it would not surprise me if before the election, because if you've seen just how quickly Joe Biden is going downhill cognitively, it would not surprise me if before the election, Michelle Obama becomes the candidate. And if that's the case, then Michelle Obama will be our next president. I can almost guarantee you that. Okay. Do you think the Ukraine war will end if Trump becomes president? I think it has a better chance of ending if Trump becomes president. I don't think that ending would be good for the Ukrainians, and it probably would not be good for NATO if it ended, because it's going to end in a way that actually allows Russia to maintain or even grow its its ability to threaten the rest of the world. Let's put it that way. I don't think Gavin Newsom could win the presidency. That guy's a psychopath. I met him once too. What a crazy guy that is. Holy smokes. He just is not a likable person at all. He's about as likable as Kamala Harris. And that's saying something. No, YouTube is not censoring the chat room. My wife is censoring the chat room, and that's a good thing. She's very good on the smite button. So, all right. Well, God bless you all. I'm going to run and get busy working around the farm here. If you don't hear from me for the next 4 or 5 days, it's because we're having a family reunion. We've got 50 people here, and it's going to be crazy. So let me enjoy taking a few days off, and I'll see you next week sometime. All right. God bless you all. Thank you for watching. Please like and share the podcast, and go over to chuckholton.com and support us over there as well. We'll see you later. Take care.